I'd like to call the October 30th Board of Education meeting to order. Recognizing that we have a quorum, we do have 2 people missing today. Has everybody had a chance to review the agenda?
Yes.
Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments? Okay. All in favor? Aye. As we do at the beginning and end of every meeting, we look for comments from the public. If there's anybody that would like to come up to speak, we have time now, and we'll have time at the end of the meeting as well. Seeing none, I'd like to remind everybody that they can always reach us via email, and we do read those, so please do that. We move now to the consent agenda. Has everybody had a chance to take a look at that?
Yes.
Questions, comments? One thing that I did notice on the consent agenda is policy 5144 for physical activity and student discipline. I'd like to make a motion to move that to next week because a question did come up on whether or not school lunch should be included in that policy, and I was not at the last meeting, which means if I recuse myself from this vote, we wouldn't have a quorum for tonight's meeting for that specific topic. So can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda with that item shelved for tonight?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. We now move on to reports and recognition. Just have a couple of comments tonight. I'd like to begin by thanking everyone who's participated so far in the superintendent search process. We had a forum last night, another forum this morning, and a number of focus groups throughout the last couple of days. And as you may know, we also have the survey on the website that's been up for several weeks, and it will also be up through this Friday, November 1st. Your feedback is extremely important to us, so if you've not gotten to one of the forums or focus groups, please take the time to fill out that survey. The feedback on that survey will come to us, I believe, at our November 14th board meeting, and we'll use that information to help us fine-tune the criteria that we're looking for to fill some very large shoes that we all know are going to be very difficult to fill.
I think our board meeting is on the 12th.
We have a special meeting on the 12th.
That's,
Okay.
yeah.
Instead
That's the
of
meeting?
the 14th.
Okay.
Yeah, the only reason it's
I think
special
we
is because it was with
Okay, we need to
HYA
make-
on the 14th.
Okay,
Oh.
thank you. So as soon as we get that report from HYA, we will share that. I'd like to preemptively thank the administrators and staff who helped develop this evening's testing report. It's amazing how many hours go into gathering that information, compiling it, analyzing it, looking at it to try to understand where our strengths and weaknesses and development opportunities are, and using that to fine-tune our curriculum and staffing and programs for the following year. It's an important component of our budget cycle, as well as our race to continue to be the best possible school district we can. I'd also like to preemptively thank Ellen Essman for the work that she does in our enrollment projections. It's amazing how accurate those numbers are and how valuable they are in preparing for the next year, because without that, we really have no clue how many students come through the door in September. And as it is, it's always a bit of a game to figure out how close we were, but you're amazing, so thank you. 2 final points on a slightly lighter note. I'd like to recognize and thank the weather gods for allowing Halloween to go on tomorrow night. Knock on wood, hopefully without incident. And lastly, I'd like to remind everyone to keep the Pumpkin Warriors in their thoughts this weekend as Kevin Meehan and his team of Trebuchet Troopers compete in the World Championship Pumpkin Chunkin' Association competition in Bridgeville, Delaware. I've been informed by the chief pumpkin warrior himself that they plan to keep the town updated chunk by chunk on the Ambler Farm Facebook page, which is www.facebook/amblerfarm. And as I understand it, the world record pumpkin chunkin' throw by Trebuchet was set at 2,032 feet, which is almost 7 football fields, by a team out of Delaware called the Pumpkin Hammer. So, good luck to them. And with that, Dr. Richards, it's all yours. Keep that.
That's all about the pumpkins. I'd like to update the board on something I've shared some information with you in the past. As you know, in the wake of Superstorm Sandy last year, and yesterday was the first year anniversary of that horrible event. Many homes and schools were damaged, and I spoke earlier in the year about a project our sophomore class undertaken to raise money for books to replace those lost at the high school's Rockaway Scholars Academy in Rockaway, New York. So yesterday, 29 of our students traveled along with Mr. O'Donnell and some others, and I'll mention the students in a moment, to the Scholars Academy in Rockaway, New York, and to participate in the one-year anniversary celebration of the progress made in the wake of that storm. One of the things that they brought with them was $18,000 and for $2,000 worth of books, or 2,000 books at a cost of $18,000, excuse me, which is a huge contribution to the school. The students delivered the 2,000 books yesterday. The principal gave them a tour through the damaged areas, and many students and teachers came up and talked to them about the impact that our students' efforts will make in the lives of the students at the Scholars Academy. And I think there was a lot of interaction between our students, had lunch with the students at the Academy, had great talk, and even learned how to do some Irish step dancing Rockaway style. And at last night's national news, they were talking about the number of names, and this is no offense to Mr. O'Donnell, that are O apostrophe in the Rockaway phone book. Apparently numbers in the dozen pages or thereabouts in that area. I think the locals refer to it as the Irish Riviera, and home to many of our brave firefighters, police officers, and other public people who live in that community. So they got to engage the students and the faculty. Claire Craven, who's our terrific high school PTA president, said, I just want to share something she wrote me. She said, I could not be more proud of the students who took this idea from the idea stage all the way to execution. They owned every step of the way, every step of the way, and it was a beautiful thing to watch them put into place critical pieces of education and deliver tangible items that truly made a difference in not only their own lives, but in the lives of students just like themselves. The students, although many students helped out with this important project, the core team of 9 students included Tori Baggio, Amanda Craven, Elizabeth Craven, Grace Kelleher, Jessica Kopska, Corey McDonald, Ian McDonald, Olivia Phelan, and Lauren White. They went with Mr. O'Donnell, Pam Hovland, who's the Project 2016 chair, and Claire Craven to the school to show their support for the day. I think it's important to note that this project began back in the summer with students brainstorming ideas and working tirelessly over the last several months. They held book bake sales. They did homecoming parade grab bags and games and raised some money that way. Football bake sales, village market, the ever-present village market bake sale. I have several pounds that are a result of my inability to say no to our kids when they're out there selling cupcakes, cookies, candy, whatever. Letters to publishers, they contacted publishers, and they collected books and money at the school on Saturdays. So it was really terrific. A couple of students, just briefly, their quotes. Rockaway the Storm with books has been an amazing experience. From the beginning, we focused on how we would get the message out and the ultimate goal. This aspect of the project taught me how important dedication, teamwork, and using social media is to fundraisers such as ours. The most important, interesting part of the project was definitely traveling to the Scholars Academy to deliver the books. We received notes and thank yous from many of the students. It was amazing to see how much they appreciated not just our help, but the help they had received from all over this past year. We got to hang out with some of their students, their step team, and even taught us a few moves. My involvement in the Rockaway the Storm project proved a success both in the amount of books we collected for the Scholars Academy and the lessons we've learned from it. So I know Ellen Essman, who's going to be reporting in a moment here tonight, in the years she had children in the schools, was very active in things like this. In the band, she was, I believe, president of Band Boosters, and she did her fair amount of fundraising for the scholarships. And so I think that part of our community is such a special legacy. And what's exciting, I think, is to see our children learning from the modeling the parents have provided for them over the years. Chris has been a PTA president, Karen's been a PTA president, Gil has been involved in schools for many, many years. So I think kids really pick up on this, and it's a great life lesson for them. So really proud of what they've done. So thank you, Bob. Please convey our thanks to the students.
Thank you very much. And then we move on to committee reports. Karen?
I'd like to report on last night's Noah Driscoll Building Committee. It was just a very exciting night because the architects presented 3 preliminary drafts of conceptual designs for the building. I was absolutely amazed at the originality of their thought. And then the mechanical engineers came in and gave us a lot of technical information about 2 HVAC systems that they thought would be appropriate for the building. And at the end of the night, the committee decided to have Turner Construction move forward with what I'll call order of magnitude cost estimates for 2 of the designs. And I think our next building committee meeting is the 14th, so stay tuned.
Thank you. Gil? Yes. We now move on to the enrollment projections with Ms. Essman.
You know, as Mrs. Essman comes up, I've said to several of our staff today, and in past years, I think there are people, and I'm proud to be a teacher, but there are people who should have been teachers and are great teachers. I think Ellen, in addition to being someone who's been so supportive and involved in the community, she is a great teacher. And those of you who haven't heard her presentation, it's a model lesson. So, Ms. Essman, your students are awaiting you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Dr. Richards and the Board of Education. I'm delighted to be here. And this is my 8th time being here with the enrollment projections. And interestingly enough, every year I get very angst on October 1st thinking, oh my gosh, is this my last time I could ever do this or show my face in the Village Market? And I've followed the same pattern as they have over the years, and I'm delighted to say that the historical figures and using the historical approach has really allowed us to be, fairly accurate, which is terrific. But of course, I don't do this in a vacuum. I have a lot of great help to guide me and answer my questions. And I have to thank Molly, who is my go-to person if I have any questions. And then, of course, we have Mary Channing, who does the pre-K census. And I don't know how that's possible when trying to count, 1-year-olds running around or 2-year-olds,
We send a letter to every family. I signed
Check the box.
and asked for the survey.
Oh, okay, because I don't think they understand as they're playing on the playground and eating grilled cheese how important they are to our enrollment projections, these little preschoolers. So that's good to know. I'm happy, and she does a great job doing that. And of course, I have Ken Post, who lends me his laser pointer and is going to be running that for me, as well as Matt, who did set it up for me this year. I did try to make the numbers a little bit bigger because I'm getting blinder as I get older. But I do want to say I'm delighted to do this year's enrollment projection. As Dr. Richards mentioned, I have 3 children that went through our school system, and I feel like this is my way of giving back to our community, our school system. They did a fabulous job providing my children with a great education that served them very well through college and gave them the tools they needed. And I even had one child who didn't really do a lot of work in high school, but still was greatly prepared for college, and it was because of our school system. So I'm delighted to do this. One of the things I want to mention before we get started is just some overview and some notes. My projection, and I know I've mentioned this before, but it's always a good refresher, is simply to do a base for next year's budget. anytime you start getting out longer, especially with a younger population that's not in school yet, the numbers start becoming what we call more unstable. Certainly, maybe 2 years out is a good base to have some sense of students that will be coming to the school. But truly, for this type of a model, which is called the cohort retention model, and basically, it basically says if I have a class, who's going to stay and who's going to go? Who, as we move through the school system, from going from kindergarten to grade 1, how many pluses do I have, or do we have decreases? As we go from grade 1 to grade 2, do we pick up students? Do we lose students? And to do this, we base it all on history. This year, and I'll go through the numbers first of what we call the migration on the diagonal. I'll go through and I'll show you exactly as a class moves through our system, how we come up with the minus or the plus. And there's nothing that's going to be difficult about this. You don't have to take out your graphing calculators or, try to brush up on any regression analysis. This is simple operations. It's plus, minus, and division. We don't even do multiplication. So this will be very easy to follow. And it's also, I'm sure all of you, having worked on the board and in real life, we use numbers every day and we analyze things every day. So that's all. These are the skills that it takes to do this and look at that. The other thing that I want to point out as I go through, I'll do net migrations, then I'll do the kindergarten enrollment, because that really is, I want to say, this trickier part of the analysis, only because these yet are children who are not in school. And what we do is we go through, and you'll see on the model, we take the census and figure out from a certain age, how much does that group increase till they enter school. And as I said, that figure tends to be a little bit more unstable, but because of the way we do things and the averages we use, I think that you'll find that kindergarten in particular has been a fairly accurate number from the projection to the actual enrollment the next year. The sticking point with me has always been this third grade class. They keep coming in, and I don't know what's going on, but all of a sudden these third graders pop up. So I'll talk about that and show you some figures as I go through that. So I will get going on that, and as I said,
as you get going, years 2008 through the current year, are those actuals at this point?
That's actual. So you'll see 2008 through 2013 is history. That's exactly what went on.
Okay.
That's the net migration, and then we'll go through in 2014. The line below those numbers is the projection.
Right.
Okay?
The one other thing I think we're going to want to get to at some point, because it has a budget implication, is what the projections were for each of those years relative to the actuals. Only because the last couple of years we've had more students than we projected.
Correct.
Well, we have a town that thinks we should have all these savings because the out-year projections look like there's dramatic drops. So just kind of file that
Sure.
away for a future
But
conversation.
the truth of the matter is, too, and I think I've mentioned this each year, is you have to take these numbers, as they say, jointly and severally. What happens is overall, we may have decreased by 15 students. But if you look at the swings, in some classes we were up by 13, and in some classes we were down by 13.
Right.
And certainly the resources you would use for a drop in a high school population would definitely not be the resources you would use in the lower grades. So that has to be taken into consideration as well. It's critical, critical numbers. And you'll see that when we do the grade grouping. All right, so we're here. We're one a bit. So let's just go through a little reminder of how we come up with these numbers. And I always like starting, truthfully, in the corner here because I get lost very fast sometimes on all these numbers. So I like to go with this kindergarten that started in 2008. When they moved to first grade the following year in 2009, we would have expected to see 325 students, but there were 346. Which meant that I had an increase of 21 students from year to year. And then all I simply do is I go down and I say these kindergartners who went through the school system from first grade now to second grade, there was another increase of 6 children to come to 352. And I go all the way down for these. This is history. It's not anything I'm making up. It's not former projections. This is historical fact, okay? So I was pleased to see that this year's kindergarten actual was actually exactly what my forecast was for last year. I was kind of shocked and kind of happy all at the same time. So that was really nice. The other thing that I was a little surprised at were these third graders. I'm just, the last couple of years have been very marveling at where they're all coming from, because it's all of a sudden they seem to pop into the school system. So what I've done here is I go through each year, example, now I go back to 2000, down to 2009. I start with exactly what the kindergarten class was in 2009. Can you make that up just a little bigger so I can read it? And I'm sure everybody else would be happy. There we go. All right, so, and then again, 2009, we had 276 kindergartners. Then, they went to first grade, there were 6 more. So they came up to 282. And then along the way, they picked up another 2 when they moved to second grade, making 284. And as they went to third grade, they picked up even more, 14. So you see, as this group from 2009 went through the system, they ended up by fourth grade being at a total of 307. All of these pluses and minuses as you go down here are what we call the net migration. So from year to year, for example, in 2008, the children moving to first grade increased by 21. In 2009, the children going to first grade increased by 6. Same with 2010, we had an influx of 21 students to go up to 313. In 2011, we had an additional 15 students to come up to 289. And then as you can see with 2012, we had an increase. I do this for every grade, from kindergarten to high school. 12th grade is over here off the screen. If we can make it a little smaller so we can see 12th grade. There we go. Here's 12th grade. And then what happens is we come up with a figure called net migrations. And you'll see this net migration figure is different from the actual decrease. Net migrations is simply the difference of, the addition of all of these numbers here of what the pluses and minuses were for a particular year in our school system. Then what happens is this little number comes because we take our net migrations, then we hope all of these seniors have graduated, so we deduct them, and we pick up in 2009 the kindergartners. So that's how we come up with what our net decrease is, going from 2008 to 2009. I know in the past I've said that we were experiencing a decline in students, and you can see, as evidenced by this, I believe we're starting to slow down that decline. I have to tell you, I checked this number about 20 times because I kept thinking, how could we possibly have no growth or no decrease? It was 0. It was completely 0. And I expect the same enrollment in 2014 as we had in this year, 2013. I was surprised by it, but I have to tell you, I checked it a number of times, which means to me that I think we're really starting to maybe level out a little bit on our decrease. The other thing is, too, is I looked at reports that have been posted so far for other school districts, such as Greenwich, New Canaan, and Reading, and Darien, and they all have slight decreases in their school districts. Greenwich has stayed, I think, fairly stable, but everything and everybody is projecting lower grades, lower enrollment totals. I know that I read also from the Connecticut Data Center that they expect lower school enrollment nationwide, but in Connecticut in particular, we have the lowest school populations. We've been declining faster than other states, so I think that we need to keep that in mind as well. The other thing I do want to mention is now that we've gone through this, we want to go up with what our kindergarten is. So if we could get to the census of pre-K children in kindergarten. I think so. Go up. Sorry. We didn't rehearse this, so I think we're doing pretty good, Ken. All right, there we are. Census of preschool children and kindergarten projections. All right, so again, we've taken history. We have birth years here, okay? These were what the original births were, but this is where the census becomes very important, and those years. This is what the census figures were for students when they were first year out from going to kindergarten, second year out from going to kindergarten, third year out from going to kindergarten, finally the fourth year out. What we do is we use all of these actual figures to come up with, could you just go down a little bit? I just want to show them what I did here, to under averages of history. Okay. We use those figures of what the increases were from when they were out in their fourth year to what they were in 1 year out to use this when we use 2009, 10, 11, and 12 census figures. So for example, children born in 2009, their census said that they were 224 children in our town. If you go down here, I had an average of 34 children from 1 year out from attending kindergarten. So these children in 2009 who will be attending kindergarten next year are expected to increase by 34 students. And that, again, all has to do with history for when we had students entering in 2009, 2010, 11, and 12. We saw, using historical figures, that when the census, using the census figures, that when these students were 4 years old, the year before they started kindergarten, this is the increase from the census to when they attended kindergarten. Now, it's important to say for these figures, I add them all up, and I divide them to come with an average of what that amount is that we expect an increase of in students from 1 year out. And I do have to round it because we all know students don't come in fractions. They come in whole people. So I make sure that we round down or up depending upon what the value is. The next part I do is the same thing from when a student is 2 years out, from when a child is 2 years out from starting kindergarten. I say, okay, the census figure, we'll see 2008 here, at 186 students. But when they entered kindergarten, they were at 244. So what I say to myself is, okay, well, in 2008, the students that were born in 2008 entered in 2013. There were 58 students that were an increase from when they were 2 years from starting kindergarten to when they started kindergarten in 2013. Okay, does everyone follow me? And please stop and ask questions because this builds upon itself. And then really it's the same thing, mathematical. When the students are 3 years out at 160, from when they started kindergarten in 2013, there was an increase, as we can see here, of 84 students. And so you just go across the board. You do it from 1, 2, 3, and 4 years out. And then we come up with our averages of how many students we were increased from the time we did the census to when they finally start kindergarten. All right? So, for students born in students entering 2014, they were born in 2009. The census this year said that there were 224. Increase of 34, which comes directly from this 1 year out average. So we expect a kindergarten enrollment of 258 students. Students that are going to be entering in 2015, who were born in 2010, are 2 years out. So they pick up this average of 55 students. The census that I received said that there were 175 children born in 2010. So if we add the 55 average increase, we come up to 230 students. And then I do the same thing for 2011. And that, of course, as we go further out, these numbers become larger as, we get more of a handle on the population, and there are students that start preschool, and we have a better grasp of how many students are out there, children out there. They're not students yet in our school system. But nonetheless, this is what we use to come up with our projected kindergarten figures, all right? If you could go back to that migration on the diagonal, which is one. There it is. Okay. So if you will see here, the kindergarten figures from 2014 to 2017 are for children already born. Those are the children that, thank you, that I did on the other sheet that I calculated will be entering our school system. And you will see that compared to previous years, we are trending a bit on the lower side, and that's because birth rates in Wilton have been much lower. And that's, not out of the norm. If you look at the state, et cetera, it's not out of the norm. There has been a trend towards a lower population of school-age children. So then, this is the part that can get a little tricky, is in 2014, I now have my kindergarten figured out. Then what I have is I have these net migration figures here. And what that simply means is that when a child goes from kindergarten to first grade, how many do I expect to increase my population as they go from kindergarten to first grade? What I do is I add up all the numbers from 2008 to 2013, and then I round them. What I also, thank you. Then what I do is I take the average, but what I do is I do an average to smooth out any anomalies. I take the first 3 most recent years, then I take the 4 most recent years and the 5 most recent years, and I average all of them so that I can come up with a smoother figure. So that if, for example, we had that one year where there were a number of children from Avalon entered the school system, that's not going to happen every year. So you need to smooth those types of figures out by rounding recent, further out, and then the 5-year, and then you come up with an average of all the averages. And again, we have to round these up because our children don't come in fractions. So what I did here is I said from 2013 to 2014, on average, we expect that we will have 16 new students come to the school system. At that point, we make 244 plus 16 is 260 students. So that will be our first grade. The same methodology is for all across the board. We expect that from going from first grade to second grade, we'll have an increase of 8 students, which will make that population 295. And then for third grade, we have an influx of 11 students to come up with 316. And you can see as you go through, I won't belabor this because you'll all be asleep. But what happens is that you'll see these increases across here, which are the averages from down below, and they're applied simply to the class, the year ahead. So if this grade was at 307, the average increase is 4, then that class will be at 311 the following year. And if you could just go over to the side a little bit, I'll show everybody. Yes, there we go. So what happens is if we add up all the students, the net migrations are 35. But interestingly enough, when you remove the high school population at 293 and add the new kindergarten, you come up with a 0 growth in total for the next year. So while we will have the same amount of students at 4,224, you'll see that if we go back to some of the lower grades like 3rd grade, 4th grade, we're increasing. From kindergarten to first, from first to second, there are general increases along this part of our educational system. And then if you go towards the end, that's when we start dropping off. And as I mentioned before, certainly the resources you would use at a high school level and a middle school level wouldn't be the resources that you want to use at an elementary school level at Cider Mill or Mill and Driscoll. So, that needs to be taken into consideration as well. When we plan our budget. So that is how we get the net figures for the projection for next year. Are there any questions at this point before I start showing all the grade groupings? Okay. All right.
Ellen, I have a quick question.
Sure.
With regard to the census for kindergarten and preschool, I understand that the initial birth levels are factual.
Correct.
But then once you get into doing your 4-year out, 3-year out here, where do you get those figures?
That's the census. What happens is those were census figures that were given to me in those years. So, for example, can you go back down? I'm sorry, I want to answer. There we go. A little bit higher. Sorry. There we go. All right. So if you look at these figures here, in 2013, 2012, 2011, and 2010, those were the actual census figures. And it holds true for the birth years 2004 through 2008. These were the actual census figures. Those don't change. Those are the same, because that's how we do this, is we build it on history, so that we're using averages of history. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, do you understand? I just want to make sure you're...
Yeah.
Okay. 'Cause
Thank you.
none of that will ever change. The thing that changes is the census for children who haven't entered school yet.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Ellen,
You're welcome.
What's interesting to me on this, if I'm reading it correctly, is the census information is consistently not accurate in projecting how many kids are going to enter kindergarten. We have to make an adjustment.
Well, what we have to make the adjustment for is migration. So, for example, the census is great, but it's only one of the tools we need to use
Right.
in order to figure out if these children aren't in school yet, what do we expect to see come the time kindergarten starts for them. And that's why we use averages of history, because we say, gee, for all of these years that we're looking at, certainly when you get to children born in 2012, I mean, there's almost 100 students that find their way into the school system between the census and then the time they enter school. And that is taken into account in the averages that we use, because all of these particular, if you look here, 2009, it was 138 students that year, the very first year that they were in the census. And that's a significant increase over the 258 we're projecting. But even if you go to the actual students for 244 that were born in 2008, their census that year was 141 students.
Right.
So, I mean, that's, like I said, significant increase that you're finding. The further you go out, the more students get added.
The reason I'm bringing it up is I know you're using the best information that we have.
Right.
And consequently, we're using it. But because the census data isn't that accurate, we're having to make adjustments, and those adjustments could conceivably manifest themselves into fairly broad discrepancies in further out years. So those 200 student drops that we see 2 years from now may not materialize.
They may or may not. I mean, that's why we use averages of history to see. And that's why this model, as I mentioned before, this model really is just to be used as a basis for a budget the following year. If you were to use any kind of building...
We need to tattoo that on the front of this report. Because
Okay.
my concern is that on this report, it shows a drop of 61, then 87, then 73. I get it. The people in this room get it. Hopefully everybody that's watching from home gets it. But when it comes time to look at the budget, people look out 2, 3, and 4 years.
Correct.
And they're going to be looking at those significant drops saying, but why do you need to invest if we're shrinking? And my point is we need to reiterate the fact that the information, because the census isn't accurate, may not be accurate in those out years.
Well, I think you're right in that regard, that we're just using the historical data we have.
Right.
And then averages. And that's why this particular model is really something that's only used to go out 1 or 2 years. It's
By you.
really,
us.
but
It's everybody else I'm worried about.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, but that message needs to get out and be made clear that this is not to be taken to a building committee or someone who says, let's reallocate our resources, because that's not what this model is used for.
Thank
This
you.
model is specifically used for budgeting the following year.
Thank you.
You're
But now,
welcome.
Dr. Prada, is that the individual who developed this model?
No, actually, this model was developed. I was trying to get a little bit of the history, because I know I have history that goes all the way back to when Bob Russell did it. That's how old the information is. But Dr. Prada uses a little bit of a different method, and he incorporates things like the baby boom echo and minor change in birth rates among mothers of certain ages. He really takes so much more into consideration. And that's the type of report you would need if you were to hang your hat on building something or reallocating some of your resources. This is not meant for that at all.
Thank
That's, beyond my purview. So. All right, so now, what is this all telling us? This is all telling us that if you could just go a little bit to the notes now. Because there are a few things I want to make sure we're aware of. These are my projection notes, and I just wanted to point out, there's Dr. Prada, who did do a projection for us last in 2008. And I've pretty much run out of data for him for 2 years. The last one was 2008. In 2019 and 21, I used birth rate and population projections from the Connecticut State Department of Data. We use just as reiterating everything I told you, that we use 5-year average migration for the students in our school system, because we feel that that gives us the best read of how they move from from class to class. And if you look at the migration figures, they're all over the map. So that's why we average them out. Some years you'll have a drop of 14s, but you'll pick up, 15 the following year. So every year really has to be standalone when you're looking at this projection. I also want to note that the birth rates are down in Wilton. So what you're seeing, and a lot of this decline, I want to point out, is because as the larger senior classes graduate, we're picking up a lower kindergarten rate. But we still have, set 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade size. They're not the ones that are changing. It's the senior class and the kindergarten class. It's on both ends of the spectrum. All right, and Connecticut had the 4th lowest birth rate in 2011. I thought I would point that out. And they don't expect that to change anytime soon. All right, if we could go to the next one. Accuracy. I always like accuracy. Let's go to this. I actually do get a calculator out every time Molly sends the numbers. I'm like, oh my God, how close was I? All right. In 2012, we had projected that we would have 4,179 students, and actually 4,224 showed up. This is the, what we call the absolute difference, which means it's just a total of all of these figures, and we don't take the minus into consideration. It's just a total with an average. This is the cumulative difference in total, not the absolute. So, using this model, we're less than 1% variable from what we've projected. So I think using history is pretty clear that it gives us a very good projection for the next year for budgetary purposes. What I also did this year, could you go a little bit to the next page, because I have some notes too. Let's look at this. Why don't we look at this? All right. What I did here is there we go. I decided, because I wanted to see this for myself as well, from 2011, 12, and 13, we always do that percentage on the school district of how far we were on or off, and I thought it would be nice to see, using historical data, of what the difference were between the actual versus the projected. And so in 2011, 12, and 13, I did K through 12, and I put what the actual enrollment had been and what what the projection had been and what the differences were. So they have been, it's interesting because 2012 seemed to be the closest with 14. But, if you go through this, look at the differences. You go from, -3 here to 16 here. Again, driving home my point that we have to look at this, each individual grade, but, as a whole school system. So that's what I wanted to point out by using this particular tool, so that we can have some sense of what each individual grade has in terms of increases or decreases from the projection. I mean, this looks really good overall if you say, hey, we're only 52 off or 14 off or 45, but as you look at, 3rd grade, certainly 16 students is a lot of students to have an influx of if you weren't expecting them. So that's why I did this. Any questions yet? Just stop me at any time. So.
Do we know if the number of students leaving the district has increased to go to private school or other places? Has that changed?
I don't think that's really changed. I think that it's stayed relatively the same. The only thing I was surprised about this year were the number of 12th graders that left from 11 to 12. Usually those numbers in high school tend to stay fairly static because they're, almost through the school system. But I was surprised to see that there was a drop in the seniors this year, and normally it's really not that large. It's, a couple. But going from 8th grade to 9th grade is typically when we have some drop off, and that stayed the same. There's been no, and I thought way back in 2008 when we had the economic crisis that we were going to have a huge change, and we really didn't. There was really no shift going from private to public. It stayed relatively the same.
Do you think it's time to do another, not that you're doing anything wrong, but should we do another Dr. Prada?
I think you
survey?
should. I think the time has come. I think that it's always good to, because I use historical data. He's using, something quite different than my approach, and I think it would make a lot of sense to have somebody come in and do a projection. Then we can compare to see.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that would be prudent, and that's what I would do.
Okay.
I
It's
would
been 5
feel more
years, and it's
comfortable
been
with
a
that, too.
tumultuous 5 years, and
Right,
There
and
hasn't-
I just think it's hard when, especially in my case, when the children haven't been born yet. I just don't have the tools. I'm not capable of figuring that out. That would be awkward to ask somebody. Are you planning on having a baby in 5 years? I don't want to do that. So this is just the difference between projected and the actual. If we could go to some of my notes. There were a couple of things that I think we should, and which is why I think it would be good to have Dr. Proud at this particular time. We have had an increase in building permits in the town of Wilton this year. We normally, over the past few years, we really haven't had, we don't pass the methodology, because I already went over that, and it's kind of dry reading. And these are some of the variables, which is important, because the system we used is based upon the fact that whatever trends there are will be absorbed by this model. So, for example, if housing starts are always, in the 10 to 12 permits per year, we assume that's going to continue. Like the housing market has been relatively flat the last few years, but my understanding, and I did call around to a number of real estate agencies and some of my own investigation using the property transfer, they had a really hot spring. There were a lot of children that I believe came into the school system because we had a huge turnover in houses. The prediction for next spring is that it's going to probably be even better than this past spring was. So again, that's why I think it would make sense to bring someone like Dr. Prada in to address those things. The other thing that's important is that the River Road project, there are 21 houses that have been permitted, to be built in the plans. These are not going to be small homes. Quite a few of these are going to have 4 bedrooms. So these are not homes for someone who's going to be retiring in. Most people, when they want to retire, they make sure there's fewer bedrooms so no one can come back home and live with them. So, that's what I'm planning on doing. But,
How's that working?
So far, so good. I'm an empty nester this year, and it's nice. But nonetheless, I think that we need to take that into consideration, because that's 21 houses. With 4 bedrooms, that could be a significant influx into the school system. And I think, yet again, should be addressed. Certainly, the woman in the building department said to me they haven't received permits yet. They haven't applied for occupancy and various building permits yet. But she said the plan is 21 units and it's moving ahead. So I think it's important we keep abreast of that.
What's the volume of 4-bedroom houses on the market? Isn't it a large number? A 4-bedroom?
Oh, generally for our town?
For our town,
yeah,
I think
it
it's a
is,
significant
generally
number.
speaking. But what's difficult about that is that you will find that there will be homes with 6 bedrooms in it, but 2 children. So it's hard to get a pin on what's that magic number. If you have 6 bedrooms, do you have 6 children, or 5 children, or 4 children? Because a lot of times what we will see is that there will be very large homes with a lot of bedrooms, but only 2 or 3 children. So that's kind of a more difficult, relation to make. All right, so I went over these. And then, of course, we discussed that the fact that the private prep school preference rates have, I think, stayed the same even throughout all of the, economic uncertainty. And then, of course, people perceive our school system as being very good and want to come in and make sure their children get a great education. So I think a lot of people will will want to get in. So that's why I'm kind of wondering if that third grade blip every year is people who want to come in because they say it's time for my children to be in a good school system, and we can now afford a home, and interest rates are down, and I think that we're starting to see some of that migration coming back. The other thing is this trends in school start age time. Many parents will hold 5-year-olds back if they just feel they're not mature enough to come into the kindergarten. They do get included in our census, and it's hard to say, but that number, I think, has stayed pretty much the same for many years in a row, like in that 40 child range where they don't come in. So I really, when I do my projection, they're already in the census. I feel that that number has been pretty static for a number of years. So I think that that trend, while continues, has not had a huge impact going forward on our projections. And then general economic conditions. I know the market was hot, the real estate market. So I think people are easing up and spending money, and certainly the interest rates are quite low. I think now is the time to buy a home if you're interested. So now we have here we go. We have, this is what we call the one sheet, where we have the school years. There we go. This is our current year, right up here, 2013. And then down here are the areas I've put into my projection, all on one sheet so that you can see what the totals are. And Molly has very nicely put in red what my projections are. Okay? Here, you will see the black right here are children who aren't even born yet. So it gets more difficult and what I would say, quote unquote, unstable the further you go out. Another reason why I think we should have someone like Dr. Crowder come in and just keep a pulse on it to make sure we're still on the same page, that we're headed in the right direction, and that these numbers, still we have a general sense of where we're headed in terms of enrollment. All right, let me just make sure, I think I've covered everything I needed to cover. I did, the only other thing I would like to see are the groupings by class so we can see what it's going to look like. I think that's it, isn't it? No, further up, sorry. Go up, yeah. Thank you, Ken. We did the accuracy. A little bit. There it is, enrollment by grade group. Sorry about that. All right. And then here's another way of looking at our data. All right. These are the two. If you could just go switch over a little bit so we can see the year here. There we go. These are enrollment projections by grade group, and these are actual figures from 2004 to 2013. K through 1, 3 to 5, 6 through 8, 9 through 12, and then this is the whole school district. I do add the preschool in. The preschool students get counted at the spring, which would be the highest population of the preschool at that time. So that figure includes out here, K, 12 plus preschool. Then we have added district over here, but that stays relatively constant as well. There really haven't been any significant changes in that. So in 2014, if we could look here on this line, we expect that at Miller Driscoll there will be 813 students. In grades 3 to 5 at Cider Mill, we'll have 974. In Middlebrook, we jump up to 1,064 students. And then 9 through 12, we'll have 1,373 students. And it's going to be exactly the same number as this year. But look at where the changes are. I mean, there are changes. Some go up, some go down. So we need to keep, be aware of that when we go to craft a budget for this. So, any questions? Anybody? Do you all understand it?
How do those preschool numbers compare to actual? The 75 versus what
That was what we had in the spring. We take the head count of what we have in the spring. I think that's the most the program can have.
We use the April.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that.
That's the most they can have.
They age up.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah. So that population, I think, is capped right here. So that's the most the program can hold, and we seem to max out every year.
Is there a way when you look at, say the influx we know come every year for third graders, to then say, well, we know based on history how many of those will require special services that we could budget in for?
I don't think you have a, that's part of the dilemma in making making a budget.
So we can't
We're doing it.
make
We're doing it.
estimates based
The
on
in-migration
history.
can cause a big swing depending on the nature of the disability. You're doing it 12 months, 13 months in advance, so when they're going to arrive, so we see swings. That's your.
I'm wondering
Yeah,
if you're
if
asking two different.
Well, if
you're
I'm
answering
saying,
two
like,
different
okay,
questions.
if history tells us that over the last 5 years we've averaged 12 new third graders every year, and that we know from educational trends in this country, X% of a class
Will
of
require services.
will require services, should we also, in addition for budgeting for those new third graders, also budget in for X% to require special services?
And I don't know what Ann's saying here. And it's I don't know how you arrive at a number. That's what I was when you talk about that.
Science.
It has been.
I'm thinking it over. I'm not quite sure how
I don't know.
to respond to it. I mean, we know that we certainly get an increase in the number of referrals at Cider Mill across the board. If that's in Miller Driscoll, Cider Mill and Middlebrook are heavy referral schools. So how the new students factor in, I could try and pull that out. I'm not quite sure. Some students move into the district with IEPs, and some a little while later get referred. So
I
we
wouldn't.
can go back and try and look.
That's a little tricky too, because that number, the 16 or 13 or whatever it was, is the net migration, which means you might have 20 students moving out and 36 moving in,
True.
and you don't know how many receiving
Yeah,
special services
there is
moving
a
out.
variation.
Right.
Unless you did an average number. If you're suggesting maybe
Like a
an
percentage,
average
I
number of
think.
kids
Well,
come in every year.
And-
I think you already do this, but my assumption in trying to answer your question and thinking about what you're saying is, if 10% of our population is special needs, what percentage of that 10% is significant needs beyond what the school district can offer? Is it 1%? Is it 2%? And then what's the average cost over a 5-year term of those extreme cases? And I think you already budget that way, but then obviously if you get a case that requires extreme care, it could be $500,000, and that could throw your model off completely.
Well, if I understand, those would be our students that we capture on excess cost over
Right.
our $74,000 threshold from this year.
But we try to budget for them ahead of time, though, so so they don't get cut out of the way. But
Right.
okay. Did that kind of get to what you were asking about?
Yeah.
Do we have other questions? No. What's our general thought about asking the district to look at a Dr. Prada evaluation? You had mentioned that it was several thousands of dollars to do that type of analysis.
Yeah, I had a note to cost. We'll cost it out and take a look at that. There are other services too. I don't know if CES has gotten into that, and I don't know if they contract with. I'll look into that, and we'll get back to you on what we find.
Certainly,
Yeah,
reading
it's
through this, that
expensive.
was the thing that jumped out at me. First, I wanted to know who Dr. Prada was. I think we've seen him every year in
He
your
used to work
notes.
for the state.
Worked for the state.
He's right, and now he's
Right.
private and does
Retired.
much better.
He went to billable hours.
Much
A better gig for him.
Much better.
But there are other enrollment professionals out there other than Dr. Prouda.
NESDEC does it as well.
Yes.
Okay.
There's companies, there's individuals. So like anything, I would look around and I'd see who was accurate, who people were happy with, and who had most value for your dollar.
It's been 5 years, and I personally don't feel these numbers, the out years, are correct. And
Right.
like you, I just know what the what some members of the community are going to say, and I just think they're incorrect. I mean, I see property values rising. I see people who are retired wanting to move out. They finally can sell because their property is worth a little bit more, and you see an in-migration. Yesterday in the Norwalk Hour, there was an article about Stamford and issues they were having because of their increasing student population. I think it's a trend, and I just hate to see us sort of miss the boat, and we need to look at those outer years. And
I think you should look at those outer
sense.
years, definitely.
Karen, your feelings?
I think the real estate market is going to bring more children into the community. I mean,
Okay, well, we'll
right?
Yeah.
we'll take a deeper
Certainly
dive
with the projects that are undergoing, I mean, I think we have to look at it. I mean, 4 bedrooms and 21 units is significant, so.
Right. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, my pleasure
Thank
as
you.
always.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We now move on to the testing report with Dr. Smith and Mrs. Driver. And for those baseball fans, we're about 15 minutes ahead of schedule.
Oh, I thought it was 15-0. St. Louis.
I'll admit I have not been watching. I have no idea.
It'll be
8:07 according to Ellen.
8:07.
Get
all right.
herself out of here, guys.
It'll be going till 11 or 12.
She read some. Ellen. No, count. There she is.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
You might need the microphone.
I do have a microphone. Can you hear me? Yes. So we'll try it without the microphone, and if you need it, I will put it on. I was told earlier this evening, and I won't name who, that there's a game tonight, and that I better do this quickly. But I am going to be presenting a lot of data, so if I'm flipping through these charts too quickly, just slow me down. Lynn and I have been looking at them for quite a long time. But if I'm moving too quickly, just tell me to slow down. So tonight I'm going to present an overview of the district's 2012-2013 standardized testing program. Specifically hold on, let me get this. Specifically the CMT, CAP, SAT, ACT, and advanced placement exams. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the colleges that our most recent graduates have been attending. But before I start, I do want to thank our district testing coordinator and driver, as well as our leadership team and our faculty for all of the hours that they put into organizing, summarizing, and analyzing this data. As you know, the State Ed Department released this information about the CAP and CMT quite late this year, which lessened the turnaround time we had for developing the testing report. And so I just wanted to acknowledge all of their hard work in pulling this information together in the time. Okay, so before I actually get into the testing results, I want to try to put standardized testing in a context. I think, in order to get a complete picture of student achievement, it's necessary to look at a variety of assessment sources. And I know that seems obvious, but I think it's worth emphasizing. We all know that multiple data points are more reliable and valid than single data points. And we need to recognize that standardized testing is a single data point. And it needs to be combined with diagnostic, formative, and day-to-day performance indicators in order to get a complete picture of our student success in learning. Now, in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of standardized testing, they do provide a common, objective measure of student achievement for teachers and parents. They also provide some insight into the strengths and weaknesses that particular students have, which aids us in figuring out what sort of extra support or enrichment they may need. And longitudinally, they do help paint a picture of student progress over time. Now, in terms of curriculum and instruction, our building leaders, instructional leaders, and teachers typically spend a considerable amount of time analyzing the results of standardized testing to figure out, both at the building, grade level, class, and individual level, to try to figure out what the strengths and weaknesses of our curriculum and instructional practices are. And then to use that information to drive program improvement efforts and to plan professional learning. However, as I said in an earlier board meeting, we are not going to be administering the CMT cap at the end of this year. And so we are trying to focus our program improvement efforts and our professional learning on preparing our teachers and students to get ready for the Common Core and the new SBAC assessments. So here again, it's important that we be mindful that standardized testing is a snapshot of a child's performance at a particular moment in time, and it does not reflect everything that the child knows or is able to do. And so now for the actual results. As you know, the CMT cap is a state-mandated assessment administered every spring to every public school child in Connecticut in grades 3 through 8 and 10. And it assesses students' application of skills and knowledge in the core content areas of reading, math, science, and writing. And it's reported at 5 levels: below basic, basic, proficient, goal, and advanced. Goal is actually the state and district target for student performance, and students who achieve goal are considered to have mastered grade level content. Okay, so this chart shows 5-year trend data on student performance on the CMTs in math and reading. We've color-coded the chart as indicated below. In red, if the scores fall between 70 and 79.9%. In green, if they fall between 80 and 89%. And in blue, if they're above 90. So as you can see, Wilton students have performed consistently well over the last 5 years. And it's clear that as students move through the grade levels, they become more proficient readers and mathematicians, and that performance levels rise fairly consistently through grade 8. This chart depicts the same trend data for writing and science. Although there was a shift here in 5th grade writing to the red range, overall the scores show a fairly consistent pattern of growth through the elementary and middle school grades. Scores in grades 5 and 8 in science are consistently in the green to blue range with between 85 and 90% at goal. Am I moving too fast? Okay. So another, and I think perhaps better way to demonstrate patterns of growth over time is to look at a range of performance levels of a cohort of students over the course of the entire CMT testing program. On this and the following 2 graphs, we charted the progress of last year's 8th grade students from the time they were in 3rd grade. And I think this perspective reveals a consistent pattern of increasing numbers of students moving into the goal and advanced levels, with a corresponding decrease in the number of students scoring below mastery. This particular chart is for math. Can everybody see that? If you could actually take the purple and the blue and add them together, you would see an increase in the number of students. Same is true for reading, and the same is true for writing. I think the benefit of looking at cohort performance this way is that it provides us with a more accurate indication of overall program effectiveness, because it emphasizes the value added to student learning over time.
Can we go back to the chart on writing and science?
Sure.
Any more on that? This one.
Yes.
So I'm assuming we can look at these numbers on the diagonal as well to watch a cohort as they go through. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yes.
So if you look at grade 4 to start and go over to 2010, and then watch that grade 4 class go to 2011, 2012, you've got a 3-year run of decreasing performance.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the grade 4 class in 2011 and the grade 4 class in 2012. And actually the grade 5 class in 2010 also. When you look at numbers like that, what do you do with those numbers? What does that tell you? How do you use that information?
Well, it's important to keep in mind that when students move from grade level to grade level, they are trying to master a different content area, and a more difficult one. We do like to see increasing numbers of students mastering more of the content, but the content does get more difficult. So, I mean, we do use the information to try to tweak curriculum and instruction so that we can make sure that as many students as possible are mastering the content or even moving to the advanced levels. But the bar gets raised as we go year to year. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But it also leads me to think that while that bar is raising, fewer people are getting over it. So it would lead me to think that we need to look pretty closely at that.
But again, if you look at this, the next scores, this is again our 8th grade class last year. And these are the performance levels that they achieved from 3rd grade to 8th grade. And in general, I mean, it's not a perfect trend, but the pattern is that increasing numbers of students are moving into the goal and advanced levels.
I see that. I'm just wondering if that's looking at a different cohort.
No, this is the same cohort of students where they scored in 2008 when they were in 3rd grade, all the way through what they scored in 2013.
Okay.
Okay? And that's in math, this is in reading, and this is in writing. Certainly, as you can see as I flip through these charts, the level of growth varies according to the content area. But there is a general trend that students are mastering more and more of the curriculum.
And did you say that you're not going to have the CMT in March this year?
No. As I had said, we're moving to the SBAC, which is the new Common Core aligned assessment.
But we will have the CMT.
No.
No, we won't have it.
Well,
Okay.
it gets more complicated than that. We will not have the CMT for English language arts and math. We will be continuing the CMT for science.
As will all districts.
Yes.
Oh, so it's a
Science is not going away for the time being.
Right.
Just sort of side question, is that going to be a loss of diagnostic data for the teachers? I mean, do we think that's a loss or not?
You know, I think one of the reasons we decided to move to the SBAC this year is that we want to give our teachers and students some experience in taking the test, and I think it will be very diagnostic for us. It's unfortunate that we don't have some interim assessments right now that will give us that information so that we do well on the actual test. It is a field test. It's not going to count towards the school performance index, because I think people recognize that the first-time testing is going to be very diagnostic for us. Okay? All right, so this chart and the next depict what are known as vertical scaled scores, which are actually psychometrically a better way of looking at progress of students over time. What you'll see here is last year's 8th grade, current 9th grade, and their growth scores over time from 3rd to 8th grade.
And what you'll notice, again, is a very consistent pattern of growth as they progress through elementary and middle school. And in fact, by 8th grade, they are achieving what is considered the highest level of understanding, what the state calls stage 5, which means that our students have what they call extensive knowledge of the content area being assessed. Again, the highest level. One thing you will notice here is that our students who receive specialized instruction lag somewhat behind their typical peers in terms of their achievement. However, they are making significant and meaningful progress. And the same is true for reading here, where our students demonstrate a similar level of growth. To go back to the question you asked before, one of the problems is in comparing year to year is that the number of test items and the difficulty of the test items are not exactly even. This particular way of scoring tests kind of smooths that out and makes it more even. And that's why people consider this a more psychometrically better way of looking at student growth over time. Okay, so the charts on this slide and the next reflect the percentage of students achieving mastery in each content area over the course of the past 5 years and compares the performance of Wilton students to the Derg A average. Now, it's important to keep in mind that these year-to-year comparisons, grade level comparisons, are less powerful in helping us to gauge student progress, but they can be useful markers of general achievement within Derg A. Now, in mathematics, Wilton students typically score at or above the range of the Derg A average in grades 6 through 8. Actually, 5 through 8 if you look across the 5 years. In the area of reading, Wilton students generally scored at or above the Derg A average in all grade levels. This is the same trend data in writing and science.
Question for
Sure.
you on that. Would you say that that is a function of our heightened focus on reading in the lower grades and perhaps less insistence that math get drilled at the younger ages?
You know, I certainly would acknowledge that, generally speaking, at the elementary level, we do place a greater emphasis on literacy. And that's because we believe it's a leveraged subject area that affects many other subject areas, including math.
Right.
One of the things about the new math program is that it is very literacy-based. That make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so here we have the same data in writing, the same 5-year trends in comparison to Derg A. Now, the percentage of Wilton students that score at or above goal tends to fall into a range which is below the Derg A average, with an occasional exception, occasional exception down here in grade 8. Interestingly, you'll see in a few slides, by the time our students are in 10th grade, they are performing at or above the Derg A average in writing. And in science, Wilton students score above the Derg A average nearly every time. Now here are the Connecticut Academic Performance Tests. And this again shows a 5-year comparison between Wilton and Derg A. Over the course of the past 3 years, the percentage of students who scored at goal has been lower than the Derg A average in reading and math, but it's closer to or actually above the Derg A average in writing and science. So if you look towards the right-hand side of the chart in reading and math, we are somewhat below the Derg A average. But down here in writing and science, we are at or above, or at least closer to or above.
Will that drive curriculum and instruction decisions? Because if you look at the mathematics, for example, across the 5 years, it looks like we're slipping.
Yes.
we were significantly ahead, and now we're significantly behind.
I mean, we certainly look at this data primarily this year at how we're going to help individual students with their strengths and weaknesses. Looking at the curriculum, though, is not going to benefit us because we're taking a different assessment. And so we're trying to focus on making sure that our curriculum and instructional practices are targeted towards what the Common Core state standards and the ASBAC is demanding. It wouldn't be of much benefit for us to analyze CMTs that are aligned to the old standards